All right, let's dive in. Today we're tackling a story that's, well, it's practically legendary, the Book of Joshua.
Oh, yeah, it's got it all. Battles, miracles, a whole nation being born. It's epic.
We've got a ton of sources to help us unpack this. Commentaries, historical analyses, even some archaeological findings.
What I find fascinating about Joshua is that it's not just about military conquests.
Right, it's way more than that.
It lays the foundation for a whole society laws, dividing up the land, even these cities of refuge, like a blueprint for a nation built on faith.
It picks up right where Exodus left off. 40 years wandering in the desert, and the Israelites, led by Joshua Moses' successor, are finally about to enter the Promised Land.
But how does the book actually portray this conquest and settlement?
Yeah, what challenges did they face? I mean, it wasn't all smooth sailing, right?
Definitely not. And it starts with a pretty dramatic entrance. Imagine, the Israelites are standing at the Jordan River, and it's overflowing.
Not exactly the ideal welcome mat.
But this isn't your average river crossing.
No, this is where things get mind-blowing. The river dries up, just like the Red Sea did for Moses. They walk across on dry ground, with the priests carrying the Ark of the Covenant leading the way.
Now, think about what that must have meant for them. It's not just a cool visual, it's a sign of power, almost like Joshua saying, hey, I'm the new Moses, I've got divine backup.
It's a massive boost to their faith in him as a leader.
Absolutely. This moment would have solidified his authority.
And it's loaded with symbolism, too. Crossing a river, leaving the past behind, entering uncharted territory.
You're right, a new beginning. Can you imagine standing there watching the water rage, then it just stops? It must have been incredible.
Talk about a leap of faith.
And they actually set up 12 stones from the riverbed as a memorial, a physical reminder for generations to come of what happened there.
Wow. Powerful stuff. So they've crossed the Jordan, they're officially in the Promised Land, but it's not exactly a welcoming committee waiting for them, is it?
Nope. Their first major obstacle, the legendary city of Jericho.
Oh, Jericho, one of those stories that just sticks with you.
Totally. And their battle tactics are, well, unexpected to say the least. No battering rams, no catapults.
They get some very specific and, let's be honest, strange instructions from God. I can only imagine what the Israelites might have been thinking when they first heard the plan.
I know, right? We're going to do what?
For 7 days, they march around the city in total silence, once a day, with only the priests blowing their trumpets.
It must have been an eerie sight.
And on the seventh day, they really ramp things up. They march around 7 times, the priests blow the trumpets, everyone shouts at the top of their lungs, and boom, the walls of Jericho come crashing down.
Just like that.
Chills. Just thinking about the scene, the collapsing walls, the dust, the noise, it must have been unbelievable.
But there's a catch. They're specifically told not to take any loot from Jericho. Everything is consecrated to God.
That makes you wonder, what's the purpose of that instruction? It's like saying, this victory isn't about personal gain, it's about something much bigger.
It really emphasizes the idea of holy war and the potential consequences of disobeying divine commands.
Which, as we'll see, can be pretty severe. This leads us to the next turning point, Achan's sin and the defeat at Ai.
Even after a monumental victory like Jericho.
There's a challenge that almost throws everything off track.
Achan, from the tribe of Judah, takes some of the forbidden loot. He hides it thinking he can get away with it. But
Actions have consequences, right?
big time. When the Israelites go to attack the city of Ai, which they thought would be a cakewalk, they get absolutely crushed. It's a devastating loss.
Ouch.
This forces them to do some serious soul-searching. It's like they're confronted with the truth. Their success is directly tied to their obedience to God.
Makes you think about accountability, right? Both individual and collective. Definitely sets the stage for some reflection and repentance. But, it wasn't just the Israelites who were thinking strategically. Enter the Gibeonites.
Ah, yes, the Gibeonites and their clever deception. They knew they couldn't defeat the Israelites in a straight-up fight.
So they had to get creative.
They show up at the Israelite camp, pretending to be from a distant land. Worn-out clothes, moldy bread, the whole 9 yards.
Quite the performance.
And they actually managed to trick the Israelites into making a peace treaty.
Bold move.
This incident highlights a few things. First, it shows that the Israelites weren't invincible. They had weaknesses.
Right, they could be outsmarted.
And second, it shows the resourcefulness of those facing a powerful enemy. Sometimes, a clever strategy can be just as effective as brute force.
It's a good reminder that things aren't always what they seem. And the Israelites are now bound by this treaty, even though it was based on a lie.
Exactly. And this treaty with the Gibeonites, well, it was just one piece of a much larger puzzle. The Israelites still had a lot of land to conquer, which leads us to those intense campaigns in the south and the north.
We left off with that whole Gibeonite situation. Talk about a sneaky strategy. But they still had a ton of land to conquer, right?
Oh, absolutely. These campaigns were massive. We're talking battles against multiple Canaanite kings, alliances forming. It was a huge undertaking. They really had to fight to secure their control.
And it wasn't just about military strategy, right? You can't ignore the divine intervention. Like in the battle at Gibeon, God sends this crazy hailstorm that basically takes out more of the enemy than the Israelites do themselves.
Yeah, it's pretty wild when you think about this massive hailstorm wiping out the enemy army. Talk about a game changer.
It definitely reinforces the idea that the Israelites weren't winning on their own. There's some serious supernatural help going on. But it also brings up some interesting questions about how warfare was seen back then. I mean, some of the descriptions are pretty intense.
Definitely. It's important to remember the historical context. The world was a very different place, and warfare was, well, brutal.
It's a good reminder to look at things through the lens of the time period. But amidst all these battles, something else is happening. They have to figure out who gets what right, dividing up the land between the 12 tribes.
Right, because conquering is one thing, but dividing it up, that's a whole other challenge. It's not just drawing lines on a map. They're laying the foundation for their future as a nation.
You said it. It's a big deal.
And the book of Joshua actually gets into some pretty specific details about this whole process. Lists of cities, boundaries, even some hints at the struggles they face settling these new territories. It's not just a quick, here's your land, good luck kind of thing.
So they put some real thought into this, trying to make sure it's fair.
They had to. They were transitioning from this nomadic life to a more settled agricultural society. This division was crucial. They needed order, stability.
And it wasn't just about practical stuff, right? There was a moral and ethical dimension too, like the cities of refuge we talked about before, offering protection to someone who accidentally killed another person.
It's such a fascinating concept, especially in the middle of all this conquest and conflict. You know, like they're saying, okay, we've had enough violence. Now we're going to build a society where justice and compassion actually matter.
These cities were strategically placed all over the land to prevent all-out revenge. It really makes you think.
It speaks to this idea that they were trying to break those cycles of violence. Build a system that offered a chance at redemption.
It's like a whole other layer to their laws and beliefs, a deeper level of thinking about justice.
Absolutely. And you see this commitment to justice in other areas, too. The laws they established, the covenant renewal ceremonies, they were serious about laying the groundwork for a just society.
So it's not just conquering and dividing, it's about building a whole new way of life, a society with rules, structure, and a strong moral foundation.
Exactly. But as with any new nation, there are going to be some growing pains, some internal tensions that threaten to pull them apart.
Which brings us to the story of the Eastern tribes and that whole altar incident. Talk about a conflict that almost escalated out of control.
It really highlights that struggle between wanting to stay unified but also maintaining their individual tribal identities. It's a classic tension in any new nation, right? Remember, the tribes of Reuben, Gad, and half of Manasseh, they'd already gotten their land east of the Jordan.
And they promised to help conquer the rest, right? But once that was done, they headed back to their own territories.
And that's where things get a little, well, tense. They build this huge altar near the Jordan River.
And the other tribes are immediately suspicious, like, what are you guys up to over there?
And you can understand why, right? Throughout history, altars have often been associated with, well, let's say alternative forms of worship. Different gods, different practices.
So the other tribes are thinking, hang on, are you guys rebelling? Are you turning away from the one true God?
Exactly. So what happens? They mobilize, ready to go to war with their own brothers.
Talk about family drama. It just shows how quickly misunderstandings can escalate. Even when you share a common history, a common faith, things can get heated.
But before things get completely out of hand, the eastern tribes explain themselves. They say, hold on, this altar isn't for sacrifices, it's a memorial, a symbol of our connection to the God of Israel. We may be geographically separated, but spiritually, we're still with you.
Okay, so they're basically trying to build a bridge across the Jordan River, right? A visual reminder that they're still part of the same covenant, same God.
It's a powerful image. And it works. The tension de-escalates. They avoid a civil war.
Thank goodness for that. But it still leaves you with some questions, doesn't it? Why build an altar in the first place? Especially when they knew it might be misinterpreted.
Maybe they were trying to make a statement, a bold proclamation of their loyalty, even in their separation. Or maybe they were worried about being forgotten, losing their unique identity in this new land.
It's fascinating to think about. Whatever their reasons, it's a story about the importance of communication, making sure everyone is on the same page, and the constant challenge of staying unified, even when you have different perspectives and priorities.
It's a lesson that still resonates today. We still struggle with divisions and misunderstandings, right? It's a reminder that unity requires effort, open dialogue, and a willingness to see things from multiple points of view.
Well said. And as we move into the final chapters of the book of Joshua, this theme of unity and leadership really comes to the forefront. Because Joshua, knowing his time is coming to an end, gathers the Israelites together for his farewell speeches. And let me tell you, these speeches are powerful stuff.
They're full of wisdom, warnings, reflections on their incredible journey, all the miracles they've witnessed, the victories, the tough times they've gone through. He reminds them of God's constant faithfulness and the importance of sticking to the covenant.
But it's not just a walk down memory lane, right?
No, he's also issuing a challenge. He warns them about the dangers of forgetting their past, of straying from the path that God has laid out for them.
Yeah, he knew human nature, knew there would be temptations along the way, other influences that could pull them away from their faith.
And it all culminates in this powerful statement. He says, "Choose this day whom you will serve." Are they going to stay faithful to the God who brought them out of slavery, who gave them this land? Or will they turn to other gods, the deities of the surrounding nations?
It's a pivotal moment, a crossroads for the entire nation.
And to solidify this recommitment, he leads them in a covenant renewal ceremony at Shechem. All 12 tribes are there, publicly reaffirming their allegiance to God.
What a powerful scene, acknowledging God's sovereignty, promising to live by his laws. It's like hitting the reset button, renewing that foundation on which their nation was built.
This ceremony really sums up Joshua's leadership. It reminds us that their success wasn't just about military might or political maneuvering. It all came down to their spiritual foundation, their relationship with God.
It's a message that still resonates today, doesn't it? It makes you think about your own commitments, your own choices, and the impact those choices have on your life and the world around you. It's amazing to think about everything the Israelites went through. Conquests, dividing up the land, even almost going to war with each other. But now as we get to the end of the book of Joshua, something changes. It feels different.
Yeah, there's definitely a shift. It's like they've finally planted their roots in the promised land. They've claimed it. And now they're taking a step back, really reflecting on what it means to actually live there.
And this new chapter is marked by, well, the death of Joshua. It's the end of an era. The man who brought them out of the wilderness, led them to victory. He's gone.
It must have been incredibly difficult for them, grieving his loss, but also wondering, what now? Who's going to lead us?
But Joshua didn't leave them completely empty-handed, right? His words, his actions, that unwavering faith, it all becomes part of who they are as a nation.
Absolutely. And a big part of his legacy is this focus on remembering. Over and over, he tells them, don't forget what God has done for you.
Remember the miracles, the times God stepped in and saved you. Don't lose sight of that.
Exactly. And it's not just about looking back with fondness. It's about understanding that God is still with them, that their future depends on their faithfulness. Their past, present, and future are all connected.
He even tells them to set up physical memorials, right? These tangible reminders of God's faithfulness.
Like signposts for future generations. Hey, remember this. This is how God took care of your ancestors. Don't forget it.
Wow. It's powerful stuff. And looking back at the whole book of Joshua, you see these big themes over and over. Faith, obedience, the consequences of your choices.
Right. The Israelites experience it all. When they trust in God, follow his instructions, they see amazing victories, even when those instructions seem a little out there.
Like march around the city for a week. Okay.
Exactly. But when they disobey, when they stray from the path, well, things don't go so well.
It really hits home that our choices matter. There are consequences to our actions.
And ultimately, it all boils down to your relationship with God. That's the foundation on which everything else is built. It's a powerful message. And it's not just some ancient story. The book of Joshua still speaks to us today.
It makes you examine your own life, your own choices. Do you trust God? Are you willing to obey even when it's hard? It's a challenge.
It is. It's a challenge to live a life of faith, to be obedient, to be grateful for what God has done.
And now, as we wrap up, I'm just struck by this sense of awe. Awe at God's power and faithfulness, and also a sense of responsibility. We're part of this story too.
We are. We inherit this legacy of faith. And it's up to us to carry it forward, to remember, to choose wisely, to live lives that honor the God who brought us this far.
Thanks for joining us on this incredible journey through the book of Joshua. We'll see you next time for another deep dive into history, faith, and the human experience.